Hi. Hi.
Hello.
My name is Louise Schoen-Stark, and I look after books for Google Play. And we're really excited this weekend to be teaming up with the Brisbane Writers Festival to bring you a series of interviews and hangouts from Brisbane and Sydney. And I'm really delighted today to welcome someone who I've known for a few years now, actually, Krissy Kneen, who is not only one of the best booksellers in Australia, but a critically acclaimed published author as well. Krissy, welcome to our Hangout today.
Thanks, Louise. Nice
So
to be
you've
here.
published a couple of books now. Firstly, your memoir, Affection, in 2009, which caused quite a stir and gained a lot of attention, which was very exciting. And more recently, Triptych, which, by the sound of the title, is a collection of 3 stories. So I was reading your memoir last night, and I was really enjoyed it. You write amazingly. I was talking to Tony Jordan yesterday about the gift of writing simply and beautifully, but writing intelligently, and you've got that gift too. And I love the way that it went back and forward in your life. But it's very personal, unflinchingly honest. Was it difficult to write something so revealing of yourself?
It wasn't because I wrote it in small bits and I wrote it online. So I'd actually started a blog called Furious Vaginas, and I'd post a new sexual story which was true every night. And so a lot of the posts were done when I was tired. I needed, I had this strict regime of posting every single night. And so I really didn't have time to think. I had to just come up with material, and I had to delve in and look at my sex life and just to try and grab something so I could put it online. So because I had this deadline for myself of posting a new story every single day, and some of them are better than others, it made me be more open, and most of the time I was just thinking about what stories I had left to tell, rather than whether they were okay to tell or not. So I was really just trying to hit deadline. And I think for that reason, I didn't really think about the implications of telling these stories publicly until probably until just before the book came out as a book, because a lot of them had been read by people online, and there was a really positive response to people who'd read them. So I felt quite good about the stories themselves, and then I'd done a lot of work about structuring the book and making it into a piece of work as a book with my publisher. So it had gone through this extra process, and it was only really just before the launch of it that I started to have panic attacks and suddenly realised that maybe I'd shared a little bit more than I should have.
Nothing like a finished book to sort of put the lid on any of those doubts and saying, okay, it's done now.
That's true.
But I
That's
guess
true.
it does mean that when you meet people that have read your book, they know you quite well, where you might not know them very well at all.
That is true. A lot of people feel like they're very intimate with me because they've known all the intimate details of my sex life, particularly. And so I do get people coming up and being very fond and familiar. And I've gotten used to that, actually, because it happens quite often. And so I've gotten used to people thinking that they're close friends with me when I've only met them a few times. And I like it because it means that I don't have to worry about all those socially awkward moments, because you don't have to tell people stuff. They've caught up already, and you don't have to go into your history and your background. So that's really nice, actually, to come from there. And people, of course, when it becomes a book and when it becomes a successful book, people are kinder on you as well. So I've felt that I've benefited from that in a way.
And it must be true for many people who've written memoirs that it is a very intimate portrayal of their own lives. Have you spoken to other writers about this similar issues that they face?
Yeah, I certainly have. I know that there's a lot of issues with people who have included real people that they know in their memoirs, and the relationship that's changed because they've seen themselves as you see them, and that's different to how they see their place in your life. And so I think memoirists are always aware of the ethics and the implications of what they write for the people around them, and so that's something that I've shared with a lot of memoirists. And I suppose I've never been really kind of private about my sex life. I'm private about other things in my life, but my sex life has always been something that's up for party conversations and jokes, and it's always been something I'm really open about. So that has made me a little bit feel a little bit safer, because it really is only the parts that I would be telling people when I was a bit drunk anyway. So
and I was going to ask about this later, but obviously sex has gone mainstream now with writers like E.L. James and Sylvia Day. And so from being a writer sort of not on the fringes, but writing about something, I guess, a little taboo and a bit controversial, now it's, well, everyone's reading E.L. James on planes, on buses, everywhere. And how do you feel about that? Are you thinking that's a great thing that women are discovering erotica?
Well, I think it's a great thing if women are discovering erotica from it, but a lot of people won't be led to erotica by those books, unfortunately. I still try, because I'm a bookseller as well, so I still try to put good erotic fiction into the hands of people that are reading the 50 Shades books. But I still feel more like that they'll actually move on to things that are not quite as... you know, that they won't go to good erotic fiction from that they'll be more interested in safe kind of romances, because those books, I think, are very conservative texts. And I think that's, you know, that's the difference between something that I write, and I don't put my books necessarily in the hands of everyone that buys 50 Shades of Grey and go, well, you should read my book, it's very sexy. Because they are sexy, but they're also transgressive, and they're about sexualities that people are not necessarily comfortable with. So the E.L. James books, even though they promise bondage and discipline, they don't actually, they don't follow through. You get to describe all the kind of equipment, but you never really get to use the equipment in the books. And so it's kind of like this threat of something that's a bit transgressive, but you never actually get there. Whereas in Triptych particularly, it was all about breaking taboos. It was all about finding the last taboos and taking your reader very gently past the line that they're comfortable, and hoping that you leave them in a place where they're very uncomfortable, which is a place that makes them an ethical reader, because that makes them go, oh, I've been unthinkingly saying that, oh, I find this particular sexuality disgusting, and yet here I am turned on by something that I would normally find disgusting. And so that makes them then think about their own lines and their own relationship to sexuality. So that was really, I think I was really playing a game with the reader with Triptych, which was about taking them past their comfort zone and leaving them in a space where they would be very unsettled. And I don't think the E.L. James readers are really wanting to be unsettled, because that whole series ends with, you know, a very traditional marriage and children. So the Red Room of Pain gets turned into a baby's nursery. You know, it's like she gets this man who's the wild man who's into bondage, and she tames him into marriage and into conventional sexuality. Whereas my books are all about taking people who might have just experienced conventional sexualities and moving them into areas where they are forced to think about alternative sexualities and wonder whether their ideas on it are right or not.
Well, I read Susanna, which I really enjoyed, because I think the other thing about your writing, it's beautifully, simply written and really engaging and draws you through. But I loved the kind of mystery of that story as well, this illicit love affair that two people were having, and not knowing each other, and her process of discovery and sneaking around to try and find him. I thought that was really engaging and really clever, and did something quite different.
It's also, yeah, and online sex is this area that, you know, a lot of the time when we talk about online sex, we talk about, you know, people watching terrible pornography or trying to find the most extremes of things online. And so I think for that particular novella, for me, it was about an online sexual experience that was a positive one, and that would lead to, you know, positive sexual experiences for someone who is just, you know, mortifyingly shy. And, you know, my character Susanna was brought up with deaf parents, and so her first language was sign language, and so a natural place for her is something like a Google Plus Hangout, you know, where she doesn't have to actually interact physically with people, and there's the safety of her being able to not use her webcams, and no one knows who she is, and she can gently go out into the world. So for me, it was about easing the reader into an unusual place, and then of course she finds she likes it, and then she becomes almost predatory in that book, where she then tries to find people and tries to connect. And so I think, you know, that was my starting point. And in fact, I started that particular story because a group of writers and I had played chat roulette in a writing retreat, which was hilarious. And we, you know, spent a long time just meeting men from around the world, normally naked and with their penises in their hand, who then started having book club with us because we were like, yeah, we're writers, and we ended up having these great conversations. And as I was here at this writing retreat with a bunch of writers who, you know, we all removed our tops because we wanted them to hang around. We'd meet people online and they'd click away when they saw we were a bunch of, you know, women with fully clothed just watching them. So we just removed our tops, and at that point we realised that this was an interaction that we could have with people around the world, and we could talk about books when they were just there for a bit of a perv. And so we kind of, yeah, that's how that story started. And I'm so glad that it did, because it moved me into thinking about pornography, and it moved me into deciding that I wanted to write a book that was a pornographic text. Ultimately. So even though it's been labelled as erotica, I still like to think of it as a pornographic text because the sex comes first in that book. The characters come out of the sexual behaviour.
That's really interesting, and a really interesting definition. I hadn't heard the two separated like that.
Yeah, it's I've been doing a lot of thinking about what is pornography and what is erotica, because it does, your definition of it changes. And you know, some people were saying that pornography is what other people like, erotica is what I like, and that's kind of you know, whatever you think is okay is then you can call it erotica, but what you think is not okay is pornography. But I actually think that the definition of it is more than that, that it's about foregrounded sex. So any pornographic work is about the sex. So even the beautiful, wonderful pornographic novels, literary novels throughout history, like the story of O, the work of Marquis de Sade, the story of the Eye by George Bataille, all of those, they're written as sex novels first. And so the sex is primary and fundamental in those books. And the story and the character come out of the sex. And so therefore, they're pornographic works. And Krissy Kneen, which is beautiful writing, absolutely beautiful erotic writing, and when you read it, you know that that was actually, well, pornography in several ways. It was actually written for $1 a page for collectors of pornography, so it's definitely pornography because it's, you know, it's paid access to sex by a writer. But also the sex is the primary and fundamental thing in each of her stories, and so that's why it's pornographic. Whereas if you've got a literary fiction book that just has a sex scene that comes naturally out of the story, I would call that an erotic text rather than a pornographic one.
Thank you very much. And you just covered one of my questions about who we should read if we want to explore erotica and pornographic text.
There's also another writer who I'd probably recommend, who I just discovered this year actually. And his name is Yasunari Kawabata, and he was the first Japanese writer to win the Nobel Prize for Fiction, and his book, The House of the Sleeping Beauties, was turned into that film by Julia Lee called Sleeping Beauty. Only it was, she rewrote it from the perspective of the woman, and his book is about this pleasure house that this old man goes to, who's worried about the loss of his sexuality, and this is a pleasure house specifically for old men, and when they get there, there is a beautiful young girl lying drugged and naked in bed, and they're not, you know, the rules of the house are you're not allowed to sexually penetrate them, but that you can do anything else without harming them. And so he goes through this incredibly beautiful exploration of what he feels like is the loss of his young sexuality as he spends night after night with these drugged, naked women. And it's such an interesting text because it's all about feelings of you know, aging and loss of sexuality, and also about violation, and about him wondering about these women and wondering about the women in his life and wondering about the impact of him as a sexual being on these women in his life. So it's, you don't love the main character at all. He's quite a complicated individual, but it was such a lovely, gorgeous read. So if you can get a hold of The House of the Sleeping Beauties or any of the work by Yasunari Kawabata, I recommend it. It's great.
I wanted to talk a little bit about your career as a bookseller as well, because it's not, I mean, a lot of booksellers become writers, but you don't often get to meet them in one-on-one situations like this. And you're a fantastic bookseller who's been passionately hand-selling books for years. And I wanted to ask you if there's anything erotica, pornographic, anything that you've read in the last couple of months that you're particularly passionate about.
Yeah, actually, I really love Susan Johnson's new book, which is called My 100 Lovers, and it's not pornographic. It's definitely a erotic novel because the story and the character come first, but it is about her sensual experience of the world. So the whole book is experience from the body of the woman out. It's divided into 100 chapters, 100 small chapters, and they're each one about a different lover that the woman has, and the lovers are not necessarily human lovers. So the lover could be the wind on her skin. The lover could be, she talks about a woman who married the Berlin Wall, which actually did happen. So people with, fetishes for inanimate objects, and so therefore her love of inanimate objects. One of her chapters is the house that she fell in love with, and so that's part of that sensual experience. But there is a lot of sex in it, and there is a lot of sexuality between men and women exploring each other's bodies and sexuality. And so it's got this really lovely, rambling narrative about this one woman as she gets towards her turning 50 and looking back on her life and all the love that has touched her body throughout that time. And it's a really beautiful text that at the end of reading it, I became a bit teary, and that had snuck up on me because I didn't realise I was reading something that was so moving, because it's just beautifully written in these little short bits, but the body whole is so great, and I'm in awe of her as a writer now because that's such a beautiful
I loved it too. I loved it because of those little short bits. You could just read one, literally one at a time, and sort of had this kind of little morsel of sweetness, without overdoing it. It was just a perfect way to read, so it was quite exciting to read something like that. And you're still working for Avid Reader in Brisbane, aren't you?
Yes, I am, yeah. Been there for a long time now.
Yeah, and the role of the bookseller in the community is something that you guys are really passionate about, isn't it?
Yeah, my role there is actually sort of the events person and the events coordinator, and I take that to mean connecting with the community on a number of different levels. So we run events with authors, which is great because I get to meet a whole bunch of great authors. But we also have these things called salons where we introduce new writers alongside a literary fiction author. And they're my favourite sessions because we actually get to hear these new voices that haven't read before in public and haven't expressed their work, and we get to discover them. And now one of our salon writers, Chris Somerville, has a novel coming out next year through UQP, which we consider our personal success because we kind of helped to mould him. And we've got a new club where we have a club that happens once a month called Somerville Writes a Novel, and we actually are watching his next book take place over the period of the time of writing it. So each month we listen to a new bit from his book, and we also get to hear from some experienced person in the industry. So we had Aviva Tupfield from Scribe come to our group on Friday to talk about how she chooses books, and before that we had Christina Schultz from the children's publisher from UQP come and talk, and we'll talk to marketing people and to agents later. So it's a really great meeting place for anyone writing a book, where you can see the development of a book and all the troubles and the horrors of writing a book and the pleasures. As Chris Somerville writes his book, we'll also be there for the launch of his first book, so we'll feel like we're a part of that. But we also get to interact with the other side of the industry, which is fascinating. And for a new writer who doesn't understand publishing, I think it's absolutely essential to connect on that level and find out, demystify the whole industry. So that's actually my favourite project that we're working on at the shop at the moment. And I love it. I love this stuff. I love thinking about new ways of interacting with the work and and getting readers and writers to meet together.
Well, thank you so much for your time today, Krissy. I really enjoyed, after knowing you for so many years as well, reading your written word. I definitely know you better now, but I also really, really enjoyed it. Good luck with the writing career. Good luck with whatever comes next and your salons. And Krissy's books are available on Google Play, so we hope you rush out and get one now. Thanks for your time today, Krissy.
Thanks, always. Bye.
Bye.